Good evening from Geneva. Welcome to our Sustainable Development Impact Summit. This session is about innovating for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And we will also focus especially on the Stockholm Plus 50 conference that's coming up next summer. It is 50 years since world leaders came together next summer in Stockholm and really kind of invented the sustainability term. Sustainability is about inclusive economics, it's about social responsibilities, but it's also about the environment. And all this comes together with the Ambition 17 Sustainable Development Goals that we have to reach to make our planet a livable place by 2030. And we have a great panel to discuss this tonight. We have the Deputy Prime Minister from Sweden, Per Bolund. Sweden is also the host of Stockholm Plus 50 in June next summer, and Per is also the Environment and Climate Minister of Sweden, so he will be going to COP26 and hopefully be successful in delivering such an ambitious COP26 that it lays and paves the ground for really also an ambitious text in Stockholm. We have Inger Andersen with us. She is the Executive Director of UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program, that was born in 1972, came out of the Stockholm conference. Will also play a major role, of course, at the COP, but also in Stockholm next summer. Then we have Geraldine Machet. She's the CEO and also the CFO of DSM, a very important Dutch company that has left a big footprint in the sustainability field the last years. And then we have Ariana De Yuan. She's the founder of Forested Food, one of the eco-entrepreneurs that will make this happen, local action on the ground. And last but not least, Vice President Al Gore. We know Al also as a Nobel laureate, but also first and foremost as a great thought leader in the field of climate change, has made a huge impact here. So welcome to this great panel. I would like to go to you first, Deputy Prime Minister Per Bolund. Is a lot of responsibility that Sweden is taking on again next summer. There has to be a lot of innovations, entrepreneurship, and thinking out of the box to make sure that we meet also the Sustainable Development Goals. So please share with us your ambitions and how we're going to make it happen so we can change the non-sustainable path we are on today. Let's face it, our planet is burning.
Well, thank you very, very much, Børge, and dear colleagues and friends, dear planetary guardians, and also supporters of transformative change for a healthy and prosperous planet for all. It's a great honor for me, of course, to be on such a distinguished panel and also being able to take part of these important discussions. I think these are important times, and we have a lot to do and a short time to do it. So these kinds of gatherings are extremely important. And of course, I think you agree with me that how to deliver sustainable development inclusively and universally by 2030 has really become the defining issue, not only of our time, but also for our and all future generations. So, as you say, we face many challenges, and not least the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic that has set so many countries back, has erased hard-won victories, and also, unfortunately, delayed the implementation of the 2030 agenda. But however, we must also see that the road to recovery also offers a unique opportunity to redefine our relationship with nature, making sure that our economies and societies are within the planetary boundaries, but also an opportunity to accelerate the transformation towards a more sustainable and a more inclusive society. The policies that we boldly decide on today and the concrete actions that we take today will be decisive for how well we succeed in building a nature positive, but also a net zero and a resilient world that is adapted to the future. And this is also the reason why we have decided to host Stockholm Plus 50 next June, 50 years after the first United Nations conference on the human environment in Stockholm. And we really believe that Stockholm Plus 50 provides a unique opportunity to engage with all stakeholders, including, of course, the business community, but also civil society, and not least the young people. The youth of the world has raised their voices, craving of us that are adults to really make action happen and take our responsibility. And we have a responsibility to listen to their voices. So we have to also discuss together how we can accelerate the transformative action to fully deliver on the 2030 agenda, but also keeping the 1.5 degree goal alive and foster a truly sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our aim is to gather the world in Stockholm once again to mobilize energy for a collaborative and inclusive effort of joint action that is oriented towards solutions on our urgent global goals. We need to move fast and we need to move forward. So with a strong focus on implementation and also on integration, the pressing agendas, but not least making generations come together, Stockholm Plus 50 can be a very much needed stepping stone to get urgent action going and to get us moving towards a healthy and prosperous planet for all. And one important aspect of the required transformation is the transition to more sustainable and just global supply chains. And I believe that Stockholm Plus 50 could serve as an important platform for mobilizing and also showcasing innovative solutions to sustainability challenges that we do face across the global supply chains. Not least how innovations can help us advance both climate action, but also biodiversity conservation, which we know also is a very pressing issue. However, we, of course, need to do this together without multi-stakeholder engagement that involves governments, but also companies, entrepreneurs, and young people, and also, not least, civil society. We will never be able to address the challenges that we face successfully. The world today has the largest youth population in history, and 90% of our young people live in developing countries. And we cannot talk about the well-being of people and planet without involving young people in such discussions and in also finding adequate solutions to the challenges that we face together. It's too late to use old solutions in a new world that is rapidly evolving, and we will never deliver on transformative action if we can't also use new innovative methods. And therefore, I also like to commend the World Economic Forum on the opportunities provided in your uplink platform, where young entrepreneurs and innovators can be linked up with both decision makers, but also with investors, and where their ideas on how to tackle SDG challenges can be scaled up and scaled up rapidly. So we now need more bold steps that truly accelerate the delivery of the 2030 agenda and the threat of climate change and also ecosystem degradation and natural disasters. We know they're increasing and we know we have to face these challenges. So it's time to listen to the science and to embrace the opportunity of transforming our societies. And I believe that Stockholm Plus 50 offers an opportunity to make the next bold steps in this regard and getting the world moving. Thank you very much.
No, thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister, and also thank you so much for underlining the importance of action here. I think we all know why, but we have to focus on how to make sure that we then mobilize the youth, but also the private sector, as you mentioned. We'll come back to that, and you can count on the full support of the World Economic Forum in the run-up to Stockholm. We see that companies are now in many sectors leading, and we hope to mobilize even more of them. I would like now to go to Inger Andersen in UNEP. I think you will also work very closely with the Swedish hosts on this important conference. And it is not only about negotiating new texts. It's really about making sure that we meet the Sustainable Development Goals and we are successful in implementing the necessary policies both on climate but also on nature-based solutions. So over to you, Inger in Nairobi.
Thank you very much, and greetings from a rainy season in Nairobi, which has begun, which delayed, but we're very happy that it's here. So look, 1972, I want to transport you back just for 30 seconds to think about what was it that made the world come together in 72. It was a time when there was an awakening around environmental issues, largely on the pollution and the toxicity side. It was a time when we had bubbling, the Rhine was bubbling, the Thames was bubbling. It was a time when fish were floating because they were dying, and it was obviously a time when we had an acid rain in Norway and in Scotland and elsewhere. So there was this decision to host this conference to speak to the human environment. It was a watershed moment. A number of treaties came out of it, including CITES, CMS, and others. We can go into that in another session. But 50 years have gone, and we now understand that, and of course UNEP was created, which is a good thing because this is the United Nations response and sort of the global conscience on the environment. But what we are now understanding is exactly as we heard from the Deputy Prime Minister, that we are pushing against the very planetary limits of what the Earth can sustain. We in UNEP speak about these three crises: the climate crisis, the biodiversity and nature crisis, and the pollution and waste crisis. So what is it we're going to do to fix this so that we can land on the Sustainable Development Goals? Well, we have to understand what's underlying these crises is us, our unsustainable consumption and production. And this means that if we're going to shift, and that's in a sense SDG 12, right? Sustainable consumption and production. And that takes us right to circularity. We are taking stuff out of the earth, mining, oil, obviously, textiles that we create, or all the raw materials, the resources that we take out of the earth. We make something with it and then we discard it right back into the atmosphere, into the environment, into the oceans, into the soils. This does not compute anymore. And so seeing companies leaning in on circularity, and we're beginning to see that, which is very, very exciting. We are seeing it in a beginning around plastics. We have a long way to go, mind you. We're seeing it in textile to some extent. We're seeing it elsewhere. So a lever has to be that of circularity. Second lever, which I won't have to go into too much because I'm sure others will pick it up, has to be around the digitalization, a digital transformation, using technology to be smart about our resources and to be smart about how we use and dispose and how much we can keep in circulation. And then obviously we cannot be just 2 days after we've come out with the NDCs and seen that we are so far from hitting where we need to go. And yet we understand that the conditional NDCs, i.e. the unfunded part of the NDCs, if that were funded, we would have a different conversation. So finance matters. And here, yes, public finance and 100 billion per year will be important. We promised that back in COP15 of climate in Copenhagen. We now have to deliver it, but also to move the banking sector and the investors and the insurance sector, because that, after all, is what will help shift. We at UNEP are working with UNEP FI, the financial initiative, where significant commitments, 3 trillion have already been committed on the financial initiative. 60 trillion in assets have already been committed in the financial, and that's about 40% of the total banking portfolio. That's what we need. Circularity, get with the technology, and be smart about finance. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Inger. Let's go over to you, Geraldine. We know that you have great passion both for the environment, but also you have strongly underlined also the responsibility for business there. You already heard Deputy Prime Minister Per Bolund mention the supply chains. We have to fix the supply chains to make sure that they're more sustainable and also that they are working in the interest of the climate and also for biodiversity, oceans, and we should get less plastic waste out of this. Maybe you can share some of the experiences and your aspirations at DSM?
Absolutely. And thank you, Borge, for having us on this panel on such an exciting week, actually, because it's the UN Food Systems Summit this week. And there is a lot of talk about food. And if there's one flip side of climate, biodiversity, etc., the linking pin is actually the food systems. Also, it actually triggers me. I didn't realize about Stockholm. I was born in 1972, so it puts a little extra personal touch to what's coming up. Now, in terms of what do we need to do to really reach our aims, we've got 9 years left. As DSM being the world leader in what makes food and feed nutritious, we're at the middle of the supply chain when it comes to how we produce food and how food is consumed. So this is where we play the most. And let me use that as a bit of a thread to connect a few dots when it comes to scaling innovation. And let's take food waste as an example, which is, by the way, a major challenge, given that we waste at least, and the latest estimates are much higher than that, than 1/3 of the food that we produce. And that the environmental footprint of that food is actually enormous, both in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, in terms of water, in terms of biodiversity, etc. Now, in terms of scaling innovation, the way we like to think of it as a private company or a private player, we're a listed company, is in 4 pieces. Firstly, it's about scaling innovation which is out there, and particularly new technology, whether it be technology on digital, but all sorts. And here I would love to flag the uplink and the 1,300 entrepreneurs, of which we have one with us this evening, where there's a lot of very creative, good science that needs scaling. And as a larger company, corporation, we can do that. So let's make sure that we connect the small scale startup entrepreneurship to the larger players to accelerate innovation. So that's aspect number 1. Aspect number 2 is, of course, the private sector needs to invest in smart innovations. And here I could come with all examples, if we have time later on the panel, of how biotechnology, how science can radically change the environmental impact of producing food, which, by the way, is the most common human activity on the planet, but leads to, for example, 2/3 of deforestation. So how do we start applying our science? And here we can reduce the methane burped by cows, for example, by 30 to 80%. It is doable. It is in our hands today. How do we scale that? So how do we keep investing? Second. The third is, of course, partnership. I think we've heard it both from the Deputy Prime Minister and from Mayor of, you don't do this alone. So how do we connect with our partners, whether it be governments or private sector or NGOs? And I'm so excited to see the UN Food Systems Summit come up with these country pathways, where there's a dialogue which is bringing all of this together, which I think will help these partnerships really accelerate so that we can get somewhere by 2030. And last but not least is, how do you actually connect across the value chain? Because consumers are increasingly interested in the environmental footprint of what they consume, whether it be clothing or food in our case, but often it's very difficult for a consumer to know the environmental footprint of what it is that they are buying. So typically connecting from end to end a supply chain is critical. And here I would like to call out the World Economic Forum, what you've done in terms of creating the food innovation hubs. There are 7 in the world. They are regionally relevant, which is critical because food is global and hyperlocal. So how do we connect the innovations that can scale in those regions and bring that innovation power across the value chain much, much faster? So for me, it's about scaling, investing, partnering, and connecting the value chain.
Thank you so much, Geraldine, and also for mentioning Uplink. I think this is a very nice segue into your contribution, Ariana. You're on Uplink. Uplink is a platform that we created at the World Economic Forum, where we try to put main challenges related to the Sustainable Development Goals on there, being water, food, climate, and then we invite eco-entrepreneurs to come up with their solutions and meet other potential partners. So it is really about scaling up innovation, as mentioned by you, Geraldine, but also Deputy Prime Minister mentioned it. So, Ariana, it's not always easy to be an entrepreneur and make innovations happen out in the field. So I know you've been successful, but you also met challenges. So over to you.
Sure. And we are a very proud and thankful member of the Uplink community. Just to give a little context, Forested Foods is an agroforestry startup, and we exist to combat deforestation and biodiversity loss by unlocking more value from conservation-based agroforestry across the global south. So complementary to DSM, who Geraldine explained as the middle of food systems, we're basically that player at the beginning. We build, develop, and work with networks of smallholder forest communities to regeneratively produce, aggregate, process, and distribute things like forest honey, spices, gums, resins, fruits, really anything that can grow in a forest. What Forested Foods is working towards is building the Cargill for deforestation-free and regenerative agriculture products. We're not only building forest-friendly supply chains, but carbon-negative ones as well, so that we can be the sourcing partner and solution to businesses working towards carbon neutrality. We've been building Forested Foods for about 2 years now, starting in Ethiopia, where we've started by mobilizing a network of 1,000 smallholder farmer beekeepers to build a vertically integrated brand of single origin honeys, and soon expanding into bulk honey and bee products from Ethiopia's indigenous trees. Our business model is really inspired by a lot of work that we were seeing across sectors. I was working for a few years in Ethiopia, where I arrived 7 years ago now, initially to work for the NGO TechnoServe and building, strengthening smallholder farmer inclusive supply chains with private sector partners like Nespresso and Diageo, but also foundations like Gates, as well as the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency. And it was during this period where I realized not just the challenges, but more importantly, the opportunity for a more vertically integrated field-based agroforestry enterprise to be a solution for a growing number of these larger corporations, notably corporations interested in investing in sourcing ingredients and supplies that did better by people and for the planet. And while I saw that these corporations, especially food and other CPG companies, had the power to market products and scale, I saw an interesting opportunity to embed Forested Foods in emerging markets like Ethiopia and around the global south to serve as the increasingly necessary, reliable, trustworthy partner, a partner with our boots truly on the ground, with supply chain expertise in aggregating the production potential of rural, fragmented smallholder forest farmers, and really ensuring quality control from the forest through agro-processing operations and finally distribution. And while corporations are increasingly investing in projects to improve sourcing activities, which we love to see more of, there is an inevitable bureaucracy, at least compared to startups, that allows ventures like us to be much more nimble in navigating the complex dynamics of business and emerging markets, managing millions of contract farming schemes with smallholders, collecting data and deploying technologies across this rural fragmented network of smallholder producers. Forested Foods is very much a nature-based solution to climate change. It's honestly not rocket science, but we are leveraging the often overlooked power of behavior science and systems change approaches to work towards our vision of intact biodiverse forests across the global south. Understanding that many people view the environment as a component of our human world versus the reality that we humans are actually a small component living within our natural world, we believe that the best way to conserve the world's critically biodiverse forests is really by helping everyone generate more value, especially commercial value, from conservation and from our forests.
Thank you so much, and thank you for your leadership in this field. Al Gore, you listen to the other panelists. We know this is really a year that matters a lot for the future of our planet. We know COP26 is coming up. We also know important meeting on biodiversity in China in the spring. We have the Stockholm meeting, but I think you will always focus on action in this field. So looking forward to hear your take on what is said, but also how you look at the prospects for the coming year. Are we going to make the changes that are necessary?
Well, thank you, Borge, and thank you for your personal leadership on all of these issues we've been discussing. As of today, there are 40 days left before the beginning of COP26. And there's good news and bad news, and I'll come to that in just a moment. But you've asked me, Borge, to react to the other four speakers. I did not know what they were going to say, so I've been furiously taking notes, listening, and I will be very brief. First of all, Per Bolund in Sweden, yes, the world will highly anticipate the Stockholm Plus 50 conference next summer, and I want to honor your Prime Minister at that time, Gro Brundtland, for her great leadership. And Per mentioned the connection to the pandemic, Borge. I think there are five parallels. Number one, with both the pandemic and the climate crisis, also biodiversity, the leading scientists have been accelerating their efforts to warn the world in the direst possible terms. And the new IPCC report just recently out is the starkest warning yet. And when the leading scientists warned us about the pandemic, we didn't listen sufficiently. We should listen on climate. Number two, both of these crises show us our interconnected world can be turned upside down suddenly. Number three, science and technology have given us the solutions to both of these crises, but we have not yet organized our global cooperation to the level where we can implement these solutions quickly enough. That's why these upcoming meetings in Scotland and in China and elsewhere are so crucial. In both cases, the worst consequences of the coronavirus and the climate crisis are delayed. There are no immediate symptoms, and so this challenges our basic human nature. Asymptomatic transmission in the case of the pandemic. And although we have already seen staggering climate-related weather extreme disasters all over the world, especially in the last 3 months, they're getting worse. The scientists tell us these events are nothing compared to what we would confront if we did not quickly reach net zero and reduce these emissions. And finally, in both cases, there are negative tipping points that we must avoid. The rapid mutation of the coronavirus could still give much more deadly variants unless we have equitable vaccine access all around the world. Inga with UNEP in Nairobi talked, among other things, about circularity, and I compliment all of the UN staff. And it reminds me that 2 years before the Stockholm Conference in 1970, Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, put out his epic statement on the need for multi-stakeholder capitalism. Geraldine with the DSM, and please let me honor your former CEO, Feike Sijbesma, who is our highly valued colleague at the World Economic Forum. And you talked about business leadership, Geraldine, and indeed it is there on the part of so many businesses. And may I add, the investor community is getting involved. There is now a Net Zero Asset Managers Alliance that has pledged their portfolios will be net zero by 2050, quite a few of them by 2040. And the amount of assets in these portfolios is now $43 trillion, which is about half of all of the assets under management worldwide. So many in the business community are leading. Many are moving faster than the politicians. And Geraldine also talked about the connection to food. The IPCC has warned us about the risk of multi-breadbasket failures. We are seeing the impact on food production, lower yields from the higher temperatures, from the drought. 1.1 million people are nearing starvation in Madagascar today, in the southern cone of Africa, and in too many other places. The impact of climate on food is already quite apparent. But here, too, we have solutions because we can sequester more carbon in the soils while we increase yields and increase agricultural productivity. And finally, Ariana Dae-Yoon talked about forestry and agroforestry. And indeed, this is part of the new food production methods that can help us make our globe sustainable and feed those who are desperately in need of more nutrition today. And I want to compliment the World Economic Forum for its initiative to plant 1 trillion trees. But we have to arrest the progression of the climate crisis to stop destroying the current forests. We have seen fires all over the world this year. In my country, you perhaps have seen it on the news. In Siberia, where there are even more, the news doesn't cover that so much. But here I will conclude with good news, Borga. The IPCC report also tells us that once we reach net zero emissions and are not adding to all of this heat trapping pollution in the Earth's atmosphere, we can stop the increasing temperatures in as little as 3 to 5 years. And then if we maintain net zero, up to 50% of the CO2 will fall out of the atmosphere in as little as 25 to 30 years. Some of the other gases will last longer. We have the opportunity. We can do it. In the next 40 days, we have to see much more action than we have thus far seen in the form of better pledges and follow-through activities on the part of those who will convene in Glasgow on October 31.
Thank you so much, Al Gore, for that. And as you so strongly underline, the cost of inaction now far exceeds the cost of action when it comes to climate. But so much is at stake for our planet in those 40 days. But when we look at the geopolitical picture now, the G2 relation between China and the US, but also the relationship now between the US, Australia, UK, and China, it doesn't look that good. But that's the geopolitics. How to make sure that something that is in our common interest, all these countries are equally affected by climate change. So are you concerned about the path you're seeing towards the COP now, or do you think there will be breakthroughs like we saw in Paris and as we saw in Kyoto in '97?
Well, yes, I am concerned, Borga, very concerned, but we still do have 40 days. You mentioned the G2, and in the lead up to Paris, as you know, the cooperation between the two largest emitters, China and the U.S., was one of the keys to securing that wonderful agreement. But in the run-up to Glasgow, China has not cooperated with the world community in the same way it did 6 years ago. And in my country, the Congress has not yet found a successful pathway to enacting the very bold climate agenda that President Joe Biden has put forward. There is still time, and they may yet act. But both of these two largest polluters have to come to grips with their responsibility. I could say much more about China. They're building more new coal plants than the entire rest of the world put together. They're also building more solar panels and windmills than the rest of the world put together. So there's good news and bad news. But finally, we are in the early stages, Borga, of an historic sustainability revolution that is making the organization of the global economy based around reaching net zero the centerpiece, the organizing principle for our economic activities. It is at the scale of the Industrial Revolution and at the speed of the digital revolution. 90% of all the new electricity generation last year was wind and solar. The IEA says it will be 95% going forward. But we're still putting 162 million tons of heat-trapping man-made global warming pollution into that thin shell of atmosphere. You see it behind me here. It's so thin, and it's trapping so much heat. It is disrupting the water cycle. It is creating all of these disasters and a projected potential 1 billion climate immigrants crossing borders that's already begun. And this has a destabilizing impact on some political systems. So let's make the best use of these next 40 days.
Thank you. I want to go back to you, Deputy Prime Minister Per Bolund. You heard other speakers, of course, great expectations for Stockholm and also Swedish leadership. But you heard former Vice President Al Gore here now also greatly concerned about the run-up to COP26. And I know that the EU will do a lot of climate diplomacy. I know that you yourself are also personally very engaged in this question and will be going to COP26. How do you feel? Are you very concerned about the days that are coming, or do you feel that it is possible to break the impasse?
Well, thank you for that very important question. And I strongly believe that we have an opportunity to get a momentum going that we so urgently need. But of course, if we cannot even fulfill the pledges that we have already made in previous COPs, it will be very hard to see the movement that is necessary on COP26. And for example, the pledges on climate finance remains to be fulfilled. And from Sweden and also from the European Union, we will move forward in also providing the climate finance that is needed to get a momentum going. Because what we need now is to take away all the excuses for inaction that still exists, unfortunately. And we know that there are, unfortunately, global actors that are reluctant to move in the direction and in the pace that we know is necessary. And if we can get a momentum through increased climate finance, I believe that that will at least take away one of the obstacles. But in my view, what is urgently needed is a new and different look at what is a risk and what is an opportunity. We know that our world is transforming at a very, very fast pace, both with the climate crisis that is already upon us, that we see in extreme weathers all around the world, but also in new technologies, digitalization and automatization that is really transforming our world. And we know that it is very prone to human nature that when we are in a changing atmosphere and changing environment, it is very easy to stand still and try to analyze what is happening. But we have to be aware that the very most dangerous thing we can do at the moment is to stand still. What we need now is to act, and we need to act fast. And that is why I'm so inspired by the innovators and the young entrepreneurs that are now using the new technologies to also provide solutions for us that we can scale up and use on a global level to really make the transformation happening. And we know for a fact, and we've seen it so many times in Sweden, not least, that when we do take the bold steps, when we invest for transformation of industry and transformation of transportation, it is nothing that hampers our economy or our competitiveness. Rather the opposite. It's really what provides us with a stable economy and stable incomes for the future. So it should be a no-brainer. We should all see that the only way forward is to now transform our societies and our economies. And what we need now is to take away the excuses for inaction. And I believe that increased climate finance is a very important step that we should take and that we are willing to take.
Thank you. And just imagine what a difference it would make if we could make then green hydrogen also cost effective. If we 10 years ago had this panel and I said that the price of solar would be falling to 1/10, or price of wind would fall to 1/7. You guys probably would think I was a bit crazy, but that's not the fact. So if we're investing in the new technologies, you're saying, then we can also make things happen. We have little time left, so the rest of the speakers will have to stick to around 1 minute. But Inger Andersen, the new technologies make you optimistic?
Well, like Al, I'll say that, look, we launched the IPCC report a few weeks back, and at that launch, I said for 30 years, IPCC has come out with ever greater precision about what is happening and what we need to do. And yet we listened, but we didn't hear and we didn't take action. Now it really is a minute to midnight. Secretary General has come out and said, this is code red for humanity. We're meeting in New York right now, and we're all virtual, so I am in New York the whole night. But at any rate, on this, we are convening the Food System Summit, we're convening the Energy Summit, all of this. But Glasgow has to succeed. And it is not enough to kick the can down the road. It is not enough to make promises. We said in Paris that we would come back with more ambitious NDCs. Now is the time to deliver them, and to deliver them with clear time marked. What am I going to do in 21, in 22, in 23? Ditto for biodiversity, don't have time to go into it, but it is time. And 2022 will be a very decisive year. If we have not hit where we need to be in Glasgow, we are in dire straits. But as we've heard, we can do this. And that's the good news. The technology is there. We at UNEP are very proud, and thank you, Al, Mr. Vice President, for mentioning the Net Zero Bankers Alliance and the Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. Very proud to host these. Industry is leaning in, private sector and finance is leaning in. So let's get this done. Thank you.
Thank you, Inger. Geraldine?
Yep, I would say indeed, coming back to the investors, there was a time when there was a bit this conflict of, yes, we can, but we can't. And there is now alignment. There is alignment from the investor side, the private sector and public sector to get this done. I think the one thing that really struck me with the pandemic is the speed at which things can move when you really need to. And one of the ongoing, I think, holdbacks when it comes to climate is there's this mindset, it's going to take a long, long time. It doesn't have to. The technologies are there, the ability is there, and now the funding is starting to align. So I think the best thing we can do in the run-up to Glasgow is to be as many voices as loud as we can saying, please commit, because it's doable. And that's what we can do to help, give that little bit of backbone to go for it, because it is possible, but we need to do it now.
Well, thank you. Ariana?
I would say that I'm really looking forward to partnering with larger corporations, other NGOs and governments to really scale up conservation and use nature-based solutions to combat climate change. Climate change is very complex, but we can figure it out. And I think startups bring a lot of the gusto and the unreasonable optimism and grit to figure it out. And what we really need is partnerships to develop and deploy technologies and non-technology solutions. Climate change was, the crisis has been driven by intersectional challenges, and we're going to have to solve it with intersectional solutions.
Thank you. So then you have 1 minute, Al, at the end.
Well, thank you, Borga. Just a few hours ago, speaking to the UN General Assembly in New York, President Biden announced a doubling of the U.S. Commitment on climate finance. The U.S. is now arguably doing its share. Some will say it should be more. Of course, all nations should be doing more, but this should not be an obstacle. We have to make a success of the Glasgow conference. I'm optimistic that President Biden will also succeed in our Congress. And China has pledged net zero by 2060. It's not soon enough. But the world is moving. It's just not moving fast enough. we could stop using our atmosphere as an open sewer. That is the heart of the crisis. We have to stop the greenhouse gas emissions from increasing, and we have to reduce them. The rest of it's all footnotes. We have to stop using the sky as an open sewer. Thank you for what the WEF is doing, Borge, and thank you for what you are doing.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to an amazing panel. I'm so proud to have you here with us this evening in Geneva. We'll at least put all our efforts into mobilizing in a multi-stakeholder way for COP26. We'll all then also meet at our annual meeting in Davos in January, where we will also make sure that businesses don't only support the outcome of COP26, but also focus on nature-based solutions, also on all the other sustainability challenges we're faced with, the SDGs, and also use this as a platform for innovation, entrepreneurship, and thinking out of the box in the run-up to Stockholm 50. So thank you again for joining us, and have a good evening from Geneva. Thank you.